Seems to come up a lot on the forums, and I've been asked a few times in emails and stuff. How do you disassemble a flintlock or a Caplock or any of these, historically correct locks? And so I figured a little video tutorial would probably be the way to make this easy for people, and that way it can be out there and posted and available for anybody who wants to look it up. So I've got a couple different locks here. What I've got is I've got a L&R back action lock, I've got a Davis Jaeger lock, and I've got an English bar lock here. And basically they all disassemble about the same way. The Flintlock has a few more parts on it to take apart than the Caplocks, but more or less they all work the same way. You'll notice that they have a mainspring, usually a V-type, not always, but usually a V-type. They usually have a sear spring, which is either a flat spring or a V-type. And then on the Flintlock, of course, you have a frizzen spring out here on the outside. The project I'm currently working on is a back action lock system, and it's on a side-by-side double rifle. So this will be the lock I'm actually going to take apart today, but I'll explain the various parts on these others. It's really not any different for either one of these. Any of the three different locks, it's not really any different. It's mainspring, a V-spring, some screws to take out, and then a matter of removing the hammer from the tumbler. So pretty simple stuff, and I'm just going to show you on the one lock that I'm actually working on the project, and then I'll explain the parts on the other ones. So here we go. You need a couple of basic tools to do this. You'll need a mainspring vise. If it's a flintlock you're working on, you'll also need a frizzen vise, which is basically the same thing. They just come in a couple different styles, but it's basically the same type of vise, but it's smaller to fit the frizzen spring. So for a Caplock though, or a cartridge gun with English bar lock or a hammer back action lock, all you'll need is a mainspring vise. You'll need a punch when it comes time to drive the hammer off of the tumbler. I use a square punch instead of a round, and this one's just undersized enough to get through the square hole in the hammer. But a round punch will work just as well, as long as its diameter is big enough that you're hitting the shoulder on the tumbler and not getting into the threads. So round punch will work just as well as a square one. And then you'll need a couple of different screwdrivers, and the type of screwdrivers I use are interchangeable bits on a single handle. And the biggest thing about screwdrivers is you don't want like normal hardware store screwdrivers. What you want is screwdrivers that are called parallel ground, and that's where the sides of them come in parallel to each other instead of tapered. And you want screwdrivers that fit the width of your slot and go clear to the bottom of the depth, so that the shoulder and the width of the parallel ground doesn't have any slop in the screw. It allows it to seat clear to bottom and apply maximum pressure across the full width of the opening. So it takes a couple different screwdrivers to do this. You need one for the tumbler screw, the hammer screw. That's going to be it's going to be a narrow or thin one. And then you need one that's going to be for your main screws on the inside of the lock. Depending on which lock company you're using, whether it's Chambers or Davis or L&R or one of the others, these are different size bits because different companies make their own screws to fit their own setup. So the screwdriver that'll work for the L&R lock won't necessarily be the right width and shape to work for the Davis lock or the Chambers lock. You just want to make sure you're using the right screwdriver with the right width, and make sure they're a parallel ground that fits the screw you're taking out. So that's an important feature, otherwise you'll bugger up the screws and then you'll have a mess cleaning them all up or replacing them. So first thing to do is to set your lock at half cock. Then you want to put your mainspring vise on, and for a back action lock it's a little different. Usually both of these feet would go on the long bar, and then you'd be able to put this other foot farther up on the mainspring. For instance, this English bar lock would be a good example of that, you can put the mainspring so that both feet are applied at the farthest points and that the third foot is out at the farthest point of the spring on the upper section. So ideally that's the way you want to do it. You want to apply your pressure as evenly across the longest points of the spring as you can. But for back action lock or for shorter mainsprings that have a shorter stub on them, sometimes you have to offset it a little bit. In this case I need to offset it enough to clear the sear spring screw. And so it's going to go back about like that. So you go to half cock, then you use your mainspring vise to apply pressure to the spring, and you're not trying to compress the spring, you're just trying to hold it in place so it just takes the tension off of the tumbler or the bridle. Then you can release it from the half cock and you'll have slack in it and it'll come right off. I don't usually leave these compressed. What I usually do is I usually take them off of the pressure because I know I'm going to have this lock apart for days, possibly, depending on how long it takes me to get it inlet into the wood. So the mainspring comes out of it. Next step is to get the pressure off of the sear. So you use the right screwdriver and you can back this screw out. I like to do all this work on a piece of cloth on my workbench because then if anything shoots off, you'll notice it doesn't bounce very much, whereas if you drop it on a piece of wood, like your workbench top, it'll bounce. If you drop it on a piece of cloth, it doesn't bounce. So it's a good way to kind of keep things in order so that they don't go flying away from you. And then I like to have either a vitamin container or an old pill bottle or whatever, and I like to put my parts in something that keeps them contained and all together. So with the sear spring off and the screw off, then we can start taking these other screws out. And there's the sear and its screw. When you take the bridle off, you want to be really careful not to drop the fly, which is this very tiny piece right here that keeps your half cock from catching when you go to full cock and fire it. That piece there, you definitely want to keep track of it, keep it in a pill bottle, keep it taped to something, keep it in a way that it's not going to get lost on you. So that's the bridle, the screws, and then the fly. Then I'm going to change drivers here. And I'm going to take the hammer screw out. And this is the part where the punch comes in, and this is kind of important. Now what I do is I take a block of wood, and I've used these same blocks for years now because I've taken lots of different locks apart. What I do is I take a block of wood and I put my lock down in it so it's well supported, so that it's supported back here and so that it's supported against the bolster. Different locks may not have a bolster or whatever, like this Jaeger lock won't have a bolster on it, so you just need a hole basically that's bigger than your tumbler, and that way your lock is supported on the outside all the way around on the wood. But for a back action lock, this one has a little bolster here with an offset in it, and so it goes in here. And that keeps it nicely supported. And then this square punch is slightly undersized for the hole. You'll notice it doesn't fit tight. It's got a little rattle and loose in it, but it's wide enough that it catches all the shoulders all the way around the tumbler, so I'm not getting into the threads anywhere. And then you can just drive the tumbler off the hammer, and it comes off, and there's the lock plate and the tumbler. The only other piece on this that you could take off is the bridle that pulls, or not the bridle, the stirrup that pulls the mainspring up, that holds the mainspring to the tumbler. But usually, most locks you won't have to do that. On this L&R lock, I'll probably have to pull this stirrup off so that I can polish the tumbler and make it real smooth and clean. But on a lot of locks like Chambers, their stuff is really, really precision made, and so you really don't have to ever pull that on like a Chambers lock. So, but that's it. That's how that comes apart. Those are all the parts to it, and all the little stuff's kept in a pill bottle. Bigger stuff you can leave out. And that's the basic disassembly of a back action lock. I'll show you the only couple differences on a Flintlock. The only other things you really have to take off on a Flintlock is the corkscrew and the frizzen here, frizzen and frizzen spring. The rest of it all is basically taken off the same way as the back action. Take the mainspring, use a small vise to take the sear spring because this is a V, remove it, then remove your bridle, then you can remove this. You can either do this first or last, doesn't matter, but you'll need a frizzen vise to compress your frizzen spring, take it off, and then take your frizzen itself off. A lot of locks, and this one's done that way. You won't be able to take the frizzen spring off until you take the mainspring off. There's a screw in behind the mainspring here that actually holds your frizzen spring on. So, in this step here, in this type of lock here, you'd have to take the mainspring off. Then you could take your frizzen spring off and your frizzen, and then you could disassemble the rest. But that screw behind there is the only way to get your frizzen spring off on this type of lock. So, different locks are a little different, but they all basically disassemble the same way. And the English bar lock is basically the same deal. Mainspring, sear spring, bridle, then your hammer, and then drive your tumbler off of your lock. So, pretty basic stuff. Hopefully that helps anybody who has a question about how these things come apart and go together. Put them in a half cock, put your mainspring vise on, take your mainspring off, then disassemble the rest of it, just like I did the back action. Not too much to it, really.